Okay, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Wednesday webinar today. It's about, it's a sort of primer in baby friendly, but it's also aimed not just at people who are just starting, but also at people who are thinking of how to get through certain steps, what sort of things are asked for when people come to get to do the survey and that kind of thing. So lots of information for people at all different stages of the process. So welcome everybody to the webinar. Just before we get into the meat of the webinar, I do want to let you know, those of you who are in our hospitals, the CHAMPS hospitals from New Orleans and Southern Texas, we will be in New Orleans next week, and we're very much looking forward to seeing all of you. We have our CHAMPS learning session there at the New Orleans Hilton. So we hope that everybody, hospitals and community members alike, are registered for that and all ready to come. And if you're suddenly realizing that you haven't registered, do shoot an email to our office. And Laura and Apexa, the two people who work with me on a daily basis on CHAMPS, are on the call as well. So welcome everybody. So today we're going to be talking about baby-friendly overcoming myths, mountains, and molehills. And if you want to put your phone on mute, that would be great. If you have any background noise there, and please don't put us on hold, because if you put us on hold, we hear your background music or your away messages. I will have some time at the end for questions, so let's get started. So what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to outline the 10 steps to successful breastfeeding with a view to the real sort of what you really need to do to meet those steps. Discuss how Baby Friendly USA requires and recommend meeting the 10 steps. Identify some implementation strategies and how those are going to be tested, and dispel some myths which certainly tend to go around with the baby-friendly designation type of thing. So I hope that all of those of you on the call will be familiar with what baby-friendly is at this point. It was created by the WHO and the UNICEF back in 1991. And basically, baby-friendly is an award or a designation which is given when a hospital meets the 10 steps to successful breastfeeding. And you're deemed to have met the 10 steps to successful breastfeeding when Baby Friendly USA in this country comes and assesses compliance at the hospital, which those of you who may have been noticing that the MPINC is in the news lately. MPINC is something that the CDC does, which also the MPINC scores are something which the hospital sends back a self-report, and they're also a sort of measure of the 10 steps. But the difference between MPINC and baby-friendly designation is that in baby-friendly designation, it's an outside assessment. It's not something that you, ultimately, that you are the ones that decide. It's actually an outside body that decides. There are about 20,000 baby-friendly hospitals in the world, and this figure's going up, but 8 to 10% of U.S. babies are born in baby-friendly hospitals. In Mississippi, there are no baby-friendly hospitals yet. New Orleans, we do have some. And most baby-friendly hospitals are on the east and west coast of the United States. And this is a sort of recent map. You know, again, these are always increasing. But the point with this map is you can see the concentration of baby-friendly hospitals in the sort of northeast United States, on the west coast, somewhat in the Chicago, Wisconsin area, but really not very much in the middle of the country or in the deep south. So we won't read out all of these because you should be familiar with these, but basically the 10 steps require policy, training, prenatal attention, initiation and skin-to-skin at the time of birth, separation if moms and babies are separated, the mom needs to be able to still get milk to the baby. Exclusive breastfeeding is the focus, and babies are supposed to be staying with their mothers throughout the whole hospital stay. And not going to the nursery during the time that they're with the moms. Breastfeeding should be encouraged to be on demand, so not on a schedule. Babies should not get pacifiers or artificial nipples, and you need to help foster support groups and the community involvement in step 10. And, you know, this is CHAMPS, and we are working very hard to make sure that the community is involved. We have Kim Bogg from Rose out there working with the community transformers. We're trying to get community representation on all the task forces and involve WIC and make sure that this is not just something that's happening in the hospital, but it's also happening beyond the hospital. In 2009, the WHO did make some updates to Baby Friendly, and they did call for expansion to the community. and to have more of a focus on infants in special care. And these are some things that in the US we haven't really focused on any of these yet, but out there in other countries where they've already really mastered the hospital part of it, there are a lot more activity going on with baby-friendly communities and baby-friendly NICUs. So that hopefully will be coming down the pike in this country before too long. Also an emphasis on mother-friendly care. One of the things that was really updated in 2009 about baby-friendly was stuff related to HIV. It was really not an issue with breast milk and breastfeeding in 1991 when baby-friendly began, but obviously became much more so over time. So that was addressed in the updated guidelines, and the global criteria were reaffirmed. As I said, other countries have really taken baby-friendly out there beyond the US, so it's been expanded to the community in Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. The International NICU Initiative, which really has been done mainly in Scandinavia and is being expanded to other countries. The UK, for example, expanded baby-friendly designation or accreditation to university courses and health centres. Norway has already certified 95% of their NICUs as baby-friendly, but right now the focus in the United States is on birthing. So that's kind of some of the background to baby-friendly, just to show you that it's not just something that we're trying to do in Mississippi or we're trying to do in New Orleans, but we're trying to reach a broader range of countries, and it's an international, truly an international initiative. So in the United States, for those of you who are looking at becoming baby-friendly, there is something called the 4D pathway, which is hopefully most of you are familiar with by now. So baby-friendly in the United States is administered by a non-profit organization called Baby-Friendly USA, and we actually have a webinar coming up with them in a couple of weeks to really, with Jennifer Matranga from Baby-Friendly USA, to really help work with Baby-Friendly USA, and that your questions for Baby-Friendly USA as you go through this process, Jennifer's going to be able to answer a lot of those on the webinar. So that's something to look out for as well. The way that Baby-Friendly USA administers this initiative is through something they call the 4D pathway, which is what you're looking at on your screen right now. And many of you in Mississippi recently, we've had a lot of activity in the discovery and development phases. We've had a lot of hospitals sign up for discovery and development. Quite a lot of the New Orleans hospitals are already in development and looking to move into dissemination. But basically, this is how it's laid out, that you go through these different steps along the process, and once you have those basic things in place, then you can move into the next phase. And when you finally reach the designation phase, that's when you could prepare for the actual on-site assessment from Baby-Friendly USA and become designated through that process. Depending on where you're at with the process, this can take, usually you would say, 2 to 3 years, but one thing we've really found with some of you hospitals in the South, and I'm assuming that we have mostly hospitals from the South on this call, a lot of you, and it's not just you, but people tend to be very perfectionist about this, and they feel like they really have to get to the end of the dissemination phase before they even register for Baby-Friendly USA. So a lot of hospitals can do it more quickly, but we would encourage you to get onto the Baby-Friendly pathway as soon as you can, because as you go through each of these phases, you will find that there are tools that Baby-Friendly USA provides you with through the process. For example, there's a policy check-off tool. So there are things that you can do that will help you can get from this process that will help you. So, you shouldn't feel the need to sign up and be already about to be designated before you even engage in the process. This is just one fun way that one of the hospitals I worked with in Cherokee worked to get towards getting baby-friendly. When they had their 4D pathway, they had this little baby which they moved around the pathway as they went through the process. And by the way, they were designated earlier this year. Well done, Cherokee Nation. So looking at the specific steps with baby-friendly. Step 1 is to have an infant feeding policy that's regularly communicated to all the maternity staff. As I say, Baby-Friendly USA gives you a lot of tools to go through this process with. So when you work with Baby-Friendly, you're in the development phase, which is very early on in the process. They will send you some policy-making tools, and you do not need to reinvent the wheel. There's a model policy that was put into the journal that Laurie Feldman-Winter and I wrote for the Journal of Human Lactation that was published in 2012 that you can get if you want to copy one. another really good plan or idea, those of you who are working across systems, so I know that like the Ochsner system, for example, some of whom are on this call today, I know that you guys have done a common policy for all of your hospitals, and that's a really good way to go. That really helps for people to, you know, use a certain policy across the system. That you don't have to keep reinventing it. You may have to tweak it a little bit, but you can use the same basic policy. And some of you that are just starting on this pathway, do look to see if and who of your hospitals in your system are maybe baby-friendly already and may have access to that policy, because you may have a hospital that's completely in a different state but is part of your system that's baby-friendly, and that will help you in many, many ways. Partly, you know, you can just try to get hold of their policy and use it as a model, but it also will help you as you go through the process to convince other people in your system, like administration, that, you know, after all, baby-friendly is already being done at some of our hospitals, so why should we not be doing it here? So on many ways, it's really good to look system-wide at policy is one of the things that's really can be helpful to get from other places, because it's very specific to baby-friendly is the policy. For some reason my slide went, okay. Again, it's checked off with the audit tool. When Baby-Friendly USA do test this, they will look at that before they come to your hospital. So once you've done this check-off tool and sent it back to them, they will go through it, they will mark it up for you, and they will send it back to you early in the process. So they'll tell you what you did and didn't do right in the policy, what you need to change, what you need to add. And then right before they plan to come for designation, you can send that back to them and they will check it off, because basically they do not want to come through the door and find that the policy, which you may have written 6 months ago, is messed up, and that, you know, they're wasting their time and you're wasting your time. So they really like to get that dealt with before they come. So that's something that's very useful and helpful and baby-friendly that they do for you. And so you really should have your policy all in place before anyone walks through the door. When you're thinking of starting this, the policy is not just a breastfeeding policy. These days we're calling it, or they're calling it, an infant feeding policy. And it covers not just what is fed to the baby, but also the other baby-friendly things like skin-to-skin, rooming in, and all those kinds of things. So it's quite a major document. It's something that, you know, for example, the ABM, the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine, has a model policy which is compatible with baby-friendly practices, but it's not sufficient for the Baby-Friendly USA certification. You need an actual much longer policy than the one that the ABM puts out. So just be careful and make sure you go through the right channels, because you don't want to adopt like the AAP policy or the ABM, because they just don't have the level of detail. So it's a bit of a myth that those policies will work for you. You need a much more detailed policy than those ones. So moving on to step 2. And guys, if you just take note of your questions, and we can definitely answer them at the end. So if you have any questions on policy, just take a note of them or put them into the chat, and we'll deal with everything towards the end. Step 2 is training. Again, this is very prescriptive. We know exactly who you need to train, and we know exactly what they need to do. The only nurses that you are required to train at this point for Baby-Friendly USA is your staff that see moms and babies in labor and delivery and postpartum. So anybody who sees the baby and the mom between the time mom comes in labor to when she goes home with the baby, those nursing staff need to be trained, and they need a 20-hour training. 15 hours of it can be done in a didactic form, and if you're a part of CHAMPS, we can help you with that. We have a contract with LER, Lactation Education Resources. There are other groups out there, for example, Step 2, that do the same kind of trainings, and those are online and didactic 15 hours. And then there's a further 5 hours of hands-on training that all nurses need to do. So that is quite prescriptive. Now, we have often questions about, well, we teach our own course, will that do? If you go to the Baby-Friendly USA website, it outlines very clearly all the components that need to be done for that 15-hour training. If you have the time, the resources, and the wherewithal to do that yourself at your own hospital as actual training sessions, conference sessions to get through all 15 requirements, that is fine. You can do that. It's quite a lot of intensive work to get through all your nurses that way, but it's possible you could do it that way for sure. One thing we found that is less likely to work is if you do it piecemeal. So, you know, it's totally understandable, but not not going to be very helpful. If you send, a nurse to a conference and she gets 3 CEUs for 3 hours of baby-friendly training, in theory you could say, oh, great, she's now done 3 hours, so she only needs 12. And that is true. She does, or he does. But the problem is that there aren't many courses out there that are going to fill out the next 12 hours for you, because you can't sign up for the 12 hours and not 3 of them. So it's much more streamlined to do it as a 15-hour chunk of training, all one thing, with a clear curriculum. Because when Baby Friendly USA comes to your hospital, they're going to want to see what these 15 hours have contained, and did they meet all the lessons. And for you, if you do like an online or you do one course for everybody, then all you need to do is produce the certificates or the documentation that all those nurses completed that course and that one course's curriculum, and you've covered everybody. If you've got 5 nurses going to course A and 5 nurses going to course B and 6 of them doing it online and 3 of them home trained, it's going to be very complicated to document and keep track. So the simplest way is to use one of these complete 15-hour courses. And I hope that is clear. You don't need to train in any formalized way the prenatal staff or the postpartum staff. Of course, they need to have some training, but Baby Friendly USA is not going to quiz them or look at their training records. So that's much more flexible, and you can use different kinds of training to get them up to speed. The doctors need 3 hours of training. It's quite funny because the doctors are required to do the same questions. Like when the baby-friendly people come, they will ask your nurses and doctors the exact same questions. So in 3 hours, somehow the doctors are supposed to do that. The AAP has some online courses. We also have one through Northeastern, which you can do for free for your doctors. So they need a 3-hour training. And then how to get people to do the extra 5 hours. Well, one of the ways that can be done most easily is through a skills fair, where you can really check off all the different competencies that all your nurses need to do. And it's a really good idea to get your doctors to come to these skills fairs, and then they can do some of the practical things. I really like the skills fairs because well, let me use my hospital as an example. When I was working with my hospital to do Baby Friendly 18 years ago, we had nurses who'd been working for our hospital for 20 years and did not know how to operate a breast pump, and they ought to have known how to do that, but it was kind of embarrassing for them to admit that. Whereas if you have a skills fair and everyone gets shown everything at the skills fair, then we don't have to deal with, well, this nurse knew this and this nurse didn't know that. It's just people rotate through the different stations and people can figure out all the different skills, and that's a really good way to get them. And you can get the doctors in, you can have a bit of fun with it, like these ladies look like they're having here. So that's a good way. How do they test? Step 2, Baby Friendly USA will come and they will interview nurses and advanced practitioners and doctors from your hospital on the unit postpartum to see if they know the answers to the questions. Those questions are online. So, on the Baby Friendly setup, when you get into the dissemination phase of Baby Friendly, they give you all the questions. This is an open book test. You know what you're going to be asking the doctors. You know what they're going to be asking the nurses, and it's all outlined for you in the dissemination phase when you get into that part of the pathway. So they're not any unpleasant surprises. You do know what you're going to be asked. And they will do those interviews. They are randomly done. You can't set it up so that only the good, excited nurses are working on that day and everyone else is home. They're random. They ask for, full lists. And one kind of conundrum or twist in this is that as we said before, well, maybe I didn't spell this out. In terms of doctor education, you're only required to educate the doctors who are employed by the hospital. So if you have an obstetrician who has their own private group and they only come in to deliver babies when their babies are born and they don't work for the hospital, you do not have to prove that you've educated them. However, if that obstetrician is there on the day that Baby Friendly USA comes to do the survey, they could definitely ask her or him about the questions. They could ask them and sit down and interview them. So although they don't need to be formally educated, they certainly need to know the answer to the questions. And they also then will ask prenatal and postpartum women, as they do for all of this, to see, if this education that's been given to the staff and the doctors has translated into practices. Some of the myths associated with Step 2, that you need to train absolutely everybody in the hospital for a long time. Well, you don't. That training applies to a very specific group. Another myth is that, you need lots of lactation consultants to do this. Well, actually, you don't need any IBCLCs to become baby-friendly. That is not a requirement. It certainly helps if you have IBCLCs, International Board Certified Lactation Consultants, in your hospital, working with mothers, working with staff, doing education, helping out with expert knowledge. But that is not something that you actually have to do to become baby-friendly. You don't need a lactation consultant to be a baby-friendly hospital. And then another myth that I love, when I'm doing mock surveys and talking with doctors, and you say, how do you fix a breastfeeding problem? And the doctor says, oh, we call, the lactation consultant. Well, the doctors themselves should know the basics of, like, how to treat engorgement, how to talk to a mom who thinks she doesn't have any milk. So call lactation is not the right answer. Lactation consultants are there for the more complicated problems to help with resources and training and that kind of thing. But the everyday staff, nurses and doctors should be able to answer mom's questions about really basic lactation questions. Step 3 is about talking to your pregnant women about benefits and management of breastfeeding, and this, I would say, is probably the most difficult one to master and to score well on. If you do not have an associated prenatal clinic as part of your hospital, you are off the hook in one sense here, because you really are only going to get they're only going to test this out if the prenatal setting belongs to you, or part of the prenatal setting belongs to you. So let's say that half of the moms that come to your hospital are seen there for prenatal care and the other half are not. They're going to focus on the half who are seen at your hospital for prenatal care. Those are the women they're going to interview in your prenatal clinic. If you don't have any moms coming through your prenatal clinics, they're all with private OBs, and they will not assess that, although they will want to know what kind of outreach you've done to be able to get more the outside clinics familiar with what you're doing at the hospital. So what you need to do to plan this is to plan prenatal education in the hospital's associated clinic and develop a prenatal teaching curriculum, which needs to be completed by 32 weeks gestation. So the moms who are coming through your clinic should have had all their prenatal education completed by 32 weeks gestational age, when they're 32 weeks pregnant. That is because the baby could come early. It's also somewhat of a convenience. Baby Friendly comes to talk to your hospital, to your patients. They will only speak with moms who've been seen there for prenatal care and are over 32 weeks pregnant. It's somewhat unrealistic to expect someone at 10 weeks pregnancy to have had all the education they need for when they have the baby. So they give the data 32 weeks. You will need to come up with a system for this, those of you who have prenatal clinics. It doesn't happen on its own. When I say it's the most difficult thing to deal with, often we go to the hospital, we do the mock survey, everything's great, but no one's really even spoken with prenatal, and they're just hoping that they're going to wing it, and they can't wing it. Because some of the questions that are asked are things like, what do you know about rooming in? What do you know about skin to skin? It's not just like, is breastfeeding a good thing? There are really specific questions which, again, are available to you in the dissemination phase of the project that are asked of those prenatal women. And then they do ask you to chart that for accountability that you've actually educated moms during the step 3. How is it tested? So Baby Friendly USA will come and interview pregnant women over 32 weeks in your clinic, and they're going to ask them a lot about breastfeeding, benefits, risks of formula feeding, positioning, all that kind of stuff, and they will ask those moms, and they're going to ask about 10 moms, and 8 of them are going to have to get everything right for you to pass that phase, so it's not easy. So those of you who are on the pathway, you really need to be thinking right now, especially since this has like a 9-month lag time, what kind of education are your mothers getting? And again, it's more than just breastfeeding. If you have a small facility, even a medium-sized facility, it may not be likely that on any given day, 10 moms over 32 weeks pregnant walk through the door for their appointments. So this is going to require some forward planning, and you're going to have to make sure that you either schedule a lot of women whose appointments are 32 weeks or whose gestational age is 32 weeks or over for those appointments on those days that Baby Friendly is coming, or you're going to have to provide phone numbers, or you have to get the moms in some other way. But you will need to provide 10, and again, my experience going around is that if you're not really well prepared for this, it's not going to happen on its own. 10 women are not going to show up uninvited at the right point of pregnancy with the right answers. Again, a myth is that, if you leave this alone, prenatal will take care of it because we're giving them all this prenatal education, we're giving them all these packets. Well, that's not the case. If you're handing out information, I actually started to add on to my questions when I asked prenatal moms. I asked them all the questions from Baby Friendly USA, and then I asked them, did you read the packet? And I said, come on, be honest, and most of them say, no, I didn't read the packet. So people are not necessarily reading the information you're giving, and therefore they're not well informed. And there's a lot of research out there that shows that unless we sit down as clinicians with the mom and talk to them, or with the patient in general, and talk to them about things we're handing them, that information does not filter through. Now, again, you don't have to educate the entire state when you're doing this. You just want to be looking to specifically the clinics that are serving you, that are under your control, and then outreaching further to other clinics which may not be under your direct control, but are sending women to your hospital. And you may want to do things like launch and learn, going out to their providers and talking about how we're now baby-friendly. Designation is on the process, and we need to sort of change how we're doing prenatal education. Moving on to step 4, this one is help mothers initiate breastfeeding within 1 hour of giving birth. This is your skin-to-skin step, and so sometimes people say, well, this stuff about skin-to-skin, I don't see anything about skin-to-skin. Step 4 is one of the ones that has been somewhat adapted since it was originally created. Originally, it said that all babies had to breastfeed within the first half hour, and then they found out that babies weren't actually ready to breastfeed within the first half hour, so they lengthened it to an hour. And now, because they also have changed and have an emphasis on not just breastfeeding but all women, it also incorporates that you need to put women's babies skin to skin for 1 hour uninterrupted during the first hour of life, whether or not those babies are breastfeeding. So this is your skin to skin step, and it applies equally to cesareans as well as to vaginal deliveries, and it applies to all babies regardless of whether they're breastfeeding or not. So the goal is to have an hour of uninterrupted care between mom and baby during that first hour, skin to skin. And if the mom is going to breastfeed, then obviously during that hour at some point the baby is likely to latch on and breastfeed. This is a picture from one of the Indian Health Service hospitals where I work with Baby Friendly. As you can see, the very small operating room, everyone happy, baby's going skin to skin. I often hear that the operating rooms are too small, the temperature's too low or too high. There are ways to fix all of those practical things and help the mom and baby go skin to skin in the operating room. Baby Friendly does not require at this point that you do it in the operating room. The actual language of this for skin to skin is when the mother is able to respond to the baby. So obviously, if mom's throwing up or mom's out of it or there's general anesthesia, you're not going to put the baby skin to skin. You can get away with saying that until they're in the recovery room, if they're in the PACU or whatever kind of recovery room you have. The baby can go with the mom skin to skin at that point and stay there for an hour uninterrupted. But ideally, and given safe circumstances and the fact that practically it is doable in most hospitals most of the time, you want that to happen in the operating theatre. And again, that's all babies regardless of feeding method. Obviously, to be able to master this step, your clinicians need to learn how to place the baby skin to skin, which especially when you're talking about cesareans is not something that's straightforward. You will have to deal with leads and bandages and machinery and suturing and all those kinds of things and sterile fields. So this is something that you need to take step by step and try with your PDSAs, your QI improvement, to just do one and see how it goes and then change it. You may need to change routines, delay some procedures, and monitor the baby. Obviously, you need to monitor the baby. Putting them in skin to skin for 1 hour, we say leave them alone, and we mean leave them alone. Don't keep picking them up, don't stick them, don't weigh them, don't bathe them, but don't leave them alone in the extent that you leave the room and no one's monitoring the baby. Your nursing staff will need to learn to monitor that baby in skin to skin instead of monitoring them in a crib with a big bright light on them. Again, how is this tested? So documentation is really key for this step because what happens is Baby Friendly USA will go to the mom and they will ask her, how long was your baby skin to skin with you after the baby was born? If mom says an hour, chances are that they are all happy and they'll move on to the next mom. If mom says 20 minutes, they'll say, oh, why was that? And she'll say, oh, whatever she says. Often moms, especially if they've had cesareans, they don't remember every detail of like how they were feeling for that first hour. Or they may remember actually, but they may not know any of the medical stuff associated with it. So they may say, oh, the baby wasn't doing very well or something, and that may or may not be the case. So the baby-friendly people will go to the medical record and they'll look to see what happened at 20 minutes in skin to skin. If it says there, baby turned blue, taken away for oxygen, returned skin to skin 10 minutes later, then you're off the hook again. What tends to happen if you haven't been on the phone with our wonderful data person, Emily, and you haven't had the benefit of some kind of teaching around this, it's not documented clearly in the chart, and therefore we just don't know what's going on with the baby during the first hour. You have to make sure it's documented. It has to be documented when the baby went skin to skin, if the baby came out of skin to skin at any point, why that happened. And that's one thing that you can find perhaps at the beginning. Your skin-to-skin rates may look worse than you thought they were because you may have been saying, oh, baby went skin-to-skin and checking it off. But unless the baby really remains there for a full hour, then that doesn't count as properly done skin-to-skin, and you're not doing skin-to-skin. One kind of funny thing, that happens is like people think, oh gosh, one more thing we have to do after the baby's born. Okay, put it in skin to skin. Okay, it's been skin to skin. Now we're going to wait. Now we're going to, the point is not that it's like one more thing to add into this crazy process. The thing is, the point is to sort of not have to deal with a crazy process. Put the baby and the mom together, have them stay there, spend time together, hang out together, and not have all these interruptions. And that has to be, as I said, for an hour uninterrupted. Another myth that we're quite sure is something that hospitals kind of invent is that moms say they don't want skin to skin. Now, there may be some moms who don't want skin to skin, but if it's presented to them prenatally and people talk about it and why it's done and how it keeps the baby's temperature up, it keeps their blood sugar up, it lets them bond, most moms, most of the time, do want skin to skin. And something that's been very interesting to us as we've started to collect data from those of you who are in the CHAMPS hospitals is that we're seeing a very big racial divide between African American women not getting skin to skin and white women getting skin to skin. And when we go back and ask the hospital why is this happening, they're saying, oh, well, moms get it if they ask for it. So, not to hammer it home too much, but I'm quite sure that it's not because African American moms don't want baby skin to skin and white moms do want baby skin to skin. It's probably because the white moms are more proactive in asking. They feel more comfortable asking people who look like them to help them with skin to skin or whatever. And this really should be something that everyone gets across the board. It's not race driven. It's not demand driven. It's a process that we know is best for moms and babies. And unless moms sort of say, I really don't want this to happen, it should be the routine. Moving on to step 5, which is a little bit simpler. This is all quite involved, but step 5 is basically making sure that if moms and babies are separated, mom has access to a breast pump. The research really shows that breast pumps are the best way to get the milk, especially if you're in any kind of a situation of long-term separation. So basically, moms need access to a breast pump so that they can pump their milk for their baby if the baby's in the intensive care unit. And obviously, if your babies are in the intensive care unit or they're being transferred out of the hospital, you need to ensure that they get human milk. The most recent literature is actually showing that earlier than 6 hours is better, but right now, Baby Friendly is looking for it to be happening within the first 6 hours of birth that the mom is pumping. And manual expression. So we say that pumping is definitely the most effective way based on the research literature that we have right now to get milk over the long term. But all women, regardless of whether they're separated from their babies, should learn manual expression because they may end up at home, they may end up engorged, they may be separated from their baby somehow, not have access to a pump. So moms need to be shown this, and all clinicians, including physicians, need to be able to express how to hand express. And that's something that you really need to make sure that they learn. Moms are interviewed about, they do interview NICU moms to see if they've had access to pump and if they've been shown how to use the pump and had it in a timely manner. They also ask the staff about pumping and separation. They will ask the doctors and the nurses to demonstrate hand expression on a model, and they will ask the moms, did someone teach you hand expression? So do not sort of think that you're not going to be asked about that, because you are. A lot of the doctors think we're not going to have to deal with that. A lot of the doctors, I don't know why, but they seem to get very kind of antsy and worried about trying to do hand expression. But actually, it's really important, and people will ask. So make sure that you get that one way or another into your doctor's vocabulary. It's something that you need maybe desensitize to them, but they definitely need to do it. Step 6, this is basically the focus on exclusive breast milk. We noted as we've gone around some of the states in the South that there's an awful lot of giving of water to babies before they have a feed at the breast. That is absolutely not a documented medical necessity. Babies do not need to have water, do not need to have a trial of sucking and swallowing before they go to the breast. If anyone thinks about that logically, you know, for millennia and all other mammals, we don't give bottles of water and never have had. So it's a complete invention of our times, and they just do not need it. So babies should be going straight to breast. They should not be getting water or formula or anything else if they're breastfeeding. So the breastfed baby does not need supplementation. Supplements should be for medical reasons only and documented. Again, hypoglycemia is not the norm. Not all babies should be on hypoglycemia policies. There are outlines and criteria for that very clearly at the AAP, and it does not involve putting every baby on a hypoglycemia policy at the time of birth. So if you manage to avoid that, we can help you with that. We've got our doctors coming down there. Any of your doctors who are over-prescribing formula for hypoglycemia, have them talk to Laurie Winter. She's coming, she's our physician champion, and Renee. We've got a couple of doctors coming to New Orleans. We've got one doctor coming to, well, with several doctors, but our chief team leader is coming to Mississippi as well. And we need to really make sure that we figure out that supplementation thing, because the hypoglycemia policy is a big problem. They do also look to see that any supplements that are being given are not being given by bottle. This is a little controversial. There is not a great deal of literature out there. I would be the first to say that says that it needs to be given by an alternative feeding method, but right now that's what Baby Friendly USA is asking. And I think the sort of bigger picture of that is that once babies start to get lots of bottles, then no one really knows if they're breastfeeding or not. So if you give it by an alternative method like a cup or a syringe or a spoon, then it's kind of marks that as a breastfeeding baby that's just getting a small supplement for a medical reason rather than a baby that's doing both breasts and bottles. Also buried in this step is the fact that hospitals must pay for their infant formula. This is part of Baby Friendly. It may not be the most popular part, and it may be something that you don't try to get at the beginning, but you must pay for your formula if you're a Baby Friendly hospital, and that goes all the way back to Nestle boycott and all the practices that formula companies have done in the past that really are not ethical in terms of giving out free formula to new mothers. So you must pay for your formula. I believe myself, that based on my experience, that this is something that used to be more of a problem than it is. Many hospitals are now in these huge buying conglomerates that buy massive discounts across the system. So if you're getting an 80% discount on your formula, on your other products, you can get that same discount on your formula. So it may be less of a barrier than you imagined because you may not have to pay quite as much money as you thought, but you will have to pay for your formula. If babies are formula feeding for a medical reason or because the mother's chosen that, those women at the postpartum period need to get good information on safe preparation of formula, handling, and storage. This is actually also one of the parts that's done most poorly by many of the hospitals. You need to have something that you give them to show them how to prepare formula that should be in compliance with the CDC or the state regulations, which will involve heating the water, boiling the water, not using microwaves, storage guidelines, and that kind of thing. So they need to have full information on how to feed formula to their babies. And that's only for women who are formula feeding, but those mothers must have that education. And again, that's something new with Baby Friendly that's required. So it's not just a breastfeeding initiative, it's an educational initiative. And if women are going home formula feeding, they need to be educated about that. And you need to show that you've taught them how to prepare formula. Again, that's something that has to be done on an individual basis and not in a group, and not prenatally. But it's targeted very much to women postpartum who are giving formula. People freak out about this. They say, oh, my goodness, the hospital won't be able to have any formula. There'll be no formula in the hospital. No one will be able to take it. Well, that's not true. You just have to pay for it. and document why you're using it. And mothers will be forced to breastfeed, and this is one of the most common things that we hear about baby-friendly. Oh, everyone's going to be made to breastfeed. It's going to be this awful thing. Well, it's not like that. It's just education and giving mothers full documented information on what their feeding choices are. And what we know as we go around working with the community particularly, there's this tendency to say, oh, well, our mothers don't want to breastfeed. And our mothers could be the Navajo moms on Navajo Nation. It could be the African-American women in Mississippi. It could be any of, in my particular hospital, Haitians always mixed feed. That's what we used to say. Well, because why? Were they genetically programmed to do that? That we have these group prejudices or just group thinking ways of how women want things to be. And if you talk to women, they don't want it to be that way. There's a lot of things people don't dare to say in the hospital because they're in a compromised situation. And you talk to some of our community transformers out there and our moms that are working with us, and they will tell you they absolutely do want to breastfeed. Everyone wants the best thing for their baby, and women know it's the best thing for the baby. So we really have to get beyond that sort of, well, we're going to force these women to breastfeed and make sure that we make it possible for them to breastfeed rather than preventing breastfeeding, which is what we tend to do with all the systems that we have in place right now. Rooming in is another one that you have to look to and really look at your practices. A lot of places say, oh, yes, we're rooming in. Rooming in should be 24 hours a day. That really is 24 hours a day. That's not like at the convenience of the hospital. We're going to take the baby away now to do the hearing test. We're going to take the baby away now to do the baby's bath. We're going to take the baby away to do heel sticks. All of that routine care should be done in the room, and the hospital needs to do something to make sure that happens. Separation should be for clear medical reasons only. So you'll often hear your doctor saying, that well, it's not light enough, that's a portable light if they really need portable lights. One of the hospitals, I just love this story, one of the hospitals, they actually bought headlamps for their doctors, like coal miners wear, and the doctors were just thrilled with these headlights, which they were able to put on their heads and look at the babies. That was a true story. They did that because the doctor said it wasn't light enough in the room. But whatever works, there's always going to be excuses, and most of the time it's really what it is resistance to change. If doctors don't want to do the exams in the room, it's potentially because they're nervous about speaking to the parents. When your nursing staff don't want to do the blood draws in the room, it could be performer anxiety that they may not get the blood the first time, and they have the parents watching them. And there's a lot of things that you have to help your staff with regarding training and things. There are tools that can help you. There are portable weighing scales. There are portable baths. In the bottom right of this picture is the Billy bed, which you can use in the mom's room for hyperbilly treatment. So they really need to stay in the room all the time. And I know one thing that people often say is, well, the moms all want to send the babies back to the nursery at night.
Well, really, I wake up at 3:30 every morning.
There's someone on the call, if you could mute your phone, thanks. Yeah, so people will say they want to send the baby back to the nursery at night. This is something that as you do more education and as you change your practices to this model of care, you will see happening less, because right now, when a lot of the places that tell us that, they are not themselves practicing rooming in. So you may be saying, okay, well, we're going to take the baby for the bath now. We're going to take the baby for the hearing screen now. We're going to take the baby for the blood draws now. Oh, you want to send your baby back at 3 o'clock in the morning? Oh, you can't do that. Well, that's a real double standard. I mean, we're not demonstrating by taking out the baby every couple of hours that we really think it matters to keep the baby in the room. So once you shift your model of care so that it's apparent to the parents that you actually do want to keep the babies in the room all the time and you think it's important as a hospital, you will see that some of that goes away. It's not all going to go away all at once. You're definitely going to have some parents who certainly want their babies to go back to the nursery. They maybe have had babies babies 1, 2, and 3, and this is baby 4, and suddenly they're not letting them back to the nursery. You need to explain it clearly. If they're still wanting them back in the nursery, you can document that in the medical record and have the baby go back. But it's not something that's universal as it's made out to be once you start to make all these changes. This is a team at Tinley, which is one of the hospitals on Navajo, and these ladies bought a nice new portable scale and closed down the nursery towards the process of helping them, the rooming in, get going. So how is it documented and how is it tested? When Baby Friendly USA comes, you need to have all of this documented. So every time the baby leaves the room, you need to be documenting it. When the baby comes back, you need to document it. If the baby goes out for non-medical reason, you have to document why and that you educated the mom when the baby went in and out. That's an awful lot of documentation. One way you can maybe sell this to your staff is, well, we're not, if you keep the baby in the room, you're not going to have to do all this documentation. For those of you who are just starting out with the rooming in process, you may actually be lucky because quite often you have this same situation in reverse. If your babies are in the nursery and they go out of the nursery, that is documented. So you are just switching, really. That it's staying in the mom's room, and every time they go out of the mom's room, it's documented. So it's not actually necessarily that big a shift in thinking to document where the baby is at any given moment. So really the goal is to go from this kind of a picture, which kind of makes me terribly upset these days when I see this, because it's just not, not mother-friendly at all or baby-friendly, to this empty nursery, which we also encourage you to rename it the Neonatal Observation Unit. Nobody really wants their baby in an observation unit. It's only for sick babies, and that's really how it can work. Close down the nursery. The nursery on wheels, actually, let me talk about that a little. I don't have a slide on that, but one great invention that we came up with NICHKI when we were doing this project is something called the NOW, the Nursery on Wheels, and that would be like a really good cart that you can use for your nursing staff who's been used to dealing with or treating babies in the nursery. Now they have everything on a little cart, and they can take that cart around to the individual rooms and still do everything they need to do, but it's all in one place on a cart instead of being in the nursery. Step 8 is encourage breastfeeding on demand. This is the cue-based feeding instead of hourly or routine feeding. 8 to 12 times in 24 hours is what you can add. If your nursing staff, which they usually do, really want some kind of a recommendation that's sort of a written number, the AAP recommends 8 to 12 times in 24 hours for the number of feeds. And that's really a lot more, a lot better as a guideline to give parents than every 2 to 3 hours. If you, the clinician, tell the parent every 3 hours, you can guarantee that when that parent gets home, and baby John screams at 2 hours for something to eat, the parent looks at whatever was told them in the hospital and say, no, we were told to feed him every 3 hours, so he can't be hungry, what's the matter with him? And they really do think like that if you're giving them these kind of rigid guidelines. So if you say 8 to 12 times in 24 hours, and prepare parents for the fact that sometimes the baby will eat more at one part of the day and may go for a longer nap at another part of the day, then, the parents are much more likely to do what should be doing, which is basically watch the baby for the feeding cues, and that's what you want to teach them. And again, that 10 to 15 minutes on each side really, doesn't apply either, because sometimes the baby can be a really efficient feeder, sometimes the baby only nurses on one side, so you really want to eliminate that every 2 to 3 hours for 10 minutes from your thinking and from the way that you're teaching the patients. Again, this is tested by maternal report. Baby Friendly USA will go and ask the parents, what were you told about frequency of feeds, and by asking the staff. And the most common response that's wrong from the staff is they will say, oh, you have to feed the baby on demand every 3 hours. I like this picture. It shows actually a breastfeeding lady on a clock. On demand every 3 hours is not possible, but we seem to find it very difficult to let go of that every 3 hours thing. And the first couple of times I heard this, I just thought it was funny, but now I realize that actually that's a very, very common response from the staff. And then they're still getting across that message of every 3 hours. So really think about on-demand being 8 to 12 times in 24 hours and teach the feeding cues, because that's what parents really need to learn. And again, to be able to recognize feeding cues and see them and even teach them, the babies need to be in the room with the mom, because if the baby's down in the nursery, then obviously the mom's not going to be able to see the feeding cues. Step 9 is to avoid artificial nipples and pacifiers, which we kind of dealt with before. Your hospital should not be giving out pacifiers to mothers for their babies. If moms choose to bring in a pacifier, then that's one thing, but they really should not be given out to moms routinely as something that the hospital recommends. I mean, they're not medical devices. They're not anything that's particularly healthy for the baby. It is true, as you probably have heard widely, that, pacifiers has been linked to SIDS prevention later on in infancy, but we're not talking about SIDS in the hospital. SIDS is something that's really defined by sudden infant death later on in the baby's life, maybe after 1 to 3 months. So really, you're not talking SIDS in the hospital. So that needs to be clarified, that this is something that can be given once breastfeeding is well established, but it's not something that should be given in the hospital. And you should educate why the hospital doesn't give them out. They're not a healthy, beneficial thing. Why should a hospital be giving them out? They do still get used for painful procedures and in the NICU, and that's important for people to recognize, because I think quite often there's this myth goes out that every baby, there's not going to be any pacifiers in the NICU anymore, and so everyone's freaking out. But that's not the case. This is for healthy term breastfeeding babies, that the hospital won't give out pacifiers as a sort of routine thing. And if you don't know how to get around it, put them in the Pyxis, because you can still use them for painful procedures. You can sign them out. But if they're in the Pyxis or whatever you use to keep your medications or your even your formula in these days, a lot of people keep their formula in these lock-up situations. The point being accountability. If some people are giving out all over the place and other people are not giving them out, you want to know who's giving them out. And, of course, you often hear, well, we're going to have all these babies screaming in the nursery if they don't have pacifiers. But, actually there aren't going to be any babies in the nursery anyway. They're all going to be reaming in. So it's not really that terrible. All the parents will complain. I was working on our unit as lactation consultant when we stopped giving out pacifiers, and I did not get any complaints from any parents. I had more complaints before from parents saying, why are you giving my baby a pacifier? Why is there a pacifier in the crib? I don't want my baby to have a pacifier. So I don't think you're going to get many complaints from parents. And if they really feel strongly, then they can bring their own pacifier in. That's not a problem. And you will use them for the NICU and for circs and painful procedures. That's fine. Just throw them out before they get back to the floor with the baby. And then the final step is to foster the establishment of support groups and referring them on discharge. I just want to draw your attention to this. It doesn't just say give mom a phone number when she goes home. It says foster the establishment of breastfeeding support groups. The hospital should be really genuinely engaged with WIC officers, with La Leche League, with baby cafes, with any of these outpatient type setting groups that, hopefully the hospitals themselves can host these groups and have people attend at the hospital, or, have a baby cafe out there in the community which is staffed sometimes by the lactation consultant from the hospital. A really proactive, good, mutually beneficial situation, not just give them a phone number when they go home. I say this knowingly that it's not terribly well done, step 10. A couple of things that you need to be sure you do. The baby should see, according to the AAP, should see their healthcare professional at 3 to 5 days of life. So you should be setting up appointments for the baby to come back, regardless of the kind of community setting, very soon after they've gone home. Referring moms to the community. The resources should be in the languages that are most commonly spoken. But, there's a big myth out there that if these moms have a problem, they're going to call you. And they just don't. They don't like to bother you. And by the time somebody actually gets to them proactively, it's often too late and the breastfeeding's been stopped or interrupted. So it's not well done, this step, and actually you can kind of get away with it right now with Baby Friendly. I mean, I've seen it gotten away with, by giving them phone numbers and referring, saying, here's La Leche League, it's down the street. But, from CHAMP's perspective, we strongly believe that the community is extremely important and that you're actually not going to get these people breastfeeding more than a couple of days if there isn't more activity around step 10 and making sure that community involvement is part of this. I just like to end this presentation when I give it with a little sort of thought about the Indian Health Service, where I work as a consultant and have been very happy to work there for the past 3 years and continue to work there with mainly the Baby Friendly Initiative. In the state of Montana, where I work a lot actually, life expectancy for Native American individuals is 20 years shorter than it is for white people, and this represents a tremendous discrepancy and disparity. And the Indian Health Service hospitals are extremely disadvantaged, and in terms of federal funding, they get the least funding per capita of any other federal health system. So they're very underfunded, they're very overstretched, they have major health problems, but that this particular community, which I'm showing you, which is actually the Blackfeet community up in Montana, miles from anything miles from anything except the mountains. Their hospital is baby friendly. In fact, this week they sent in all their redesignation materials. They're all in compliance. They have a small hospital. They have a very high burden of disease and drug use and all the problems that go along with impoverished, marginalized community. But they have a strong baby-friendly program. The hospital is baby-friendly, and I strongly believe that if the Indian Health Service can do this across their system, then there is no excuse for any other hospital, any other part of the country not to become baby-friendly. And I just like to sort of end with that to make things real and make people realize this does happen. All the hospitals in the Indian Health Service are baby-friendly, and I really believe that that's something that's possible for everyone else as well. So the 10 steps are evidence-based. Baby-friendly has been implemented across the world in different settings. It's been shown to increase baby-friendly rates in all settings. The Indian Health Service is 100% baby-friendly. If the Indian Health Service can do it, Mississippi can do it, New Orleans can do it, and Mississippi can really go from number 50 in these measures to number 1. And we have Blue Cross Blue Shield helping us. There's a lot of incentive right now. The state is very involved in Mississippi, so we really hope you all come on board. That doesn't leave us a lot of time for questions, but I can take a few. I don't know. I haven't been looking at the chat. I don't know if anyone's typed anything into the chat. I don't see anything in the chat. But maybe, Laura, you can quickly open up the lines. We have a good 5 minutes left that we can take questions.
Dr. Mirwood, this is Jan Waddell from St. Tammany Hospital in Covington. I do have a question. Would you have a good reference that I can supply to physicians on the evidence base for the 10 steps to baby friendly?
Oh yes, there's lots and lots of references. I mean, we're not doing this sort of off the top of the head. There's a lot of literature out there, and I can get my team to put something together for you. But you know, each step has its own evidence base, and then then there is evidence base, for example, showing that the more of the steps that are implemented, the more. I'm sorry, there's lots of interference. I know we've unmuted the lines, but the more of the steps that are implemented, the better the breastfeeding rates. So we can get that information for you. Laura, if you could just take note of that, we can get some of that out.
Thank you so much.
Other questions?
Okay, I think we're ready to go.
I do have one question before we leave. What is the date of that Baby Friendly USA webinar in a couple of weeks?
Laura, do you have that?
It's the 26th of November.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, of October.
Okay. Oh, October. I thought it was 26th of October. And we're going to put the flyer. We're just waiting for that flyer to be okayed, but we're and we do want questions as well for Baby Friendly USA. So we're just waiting to get that flyer approved by all the sponsors, and then we're sending it out.
Yeah, then we're going to send up people for
the pacifiers. It said for painful procedures in ICU. Does that mean just for the NICU painful procedures, or does that include like CIRCs in the nursery?
Yes, it includes CIRCs in the nursery. Yeah, any kind of painful procedure that you're doing to a baby, there's documentation that shows that if the baby is sucking, that it can help. We do in our hospital, we do the heel sticks with the baby at breast. It doesn't have to be a pacifier. You can do breastfeeding is even better than a pacifier. Obviously, you can't do a CIRC while they're breastfeeding, but you can for minor things like heel sticks. You can use the baby's, have the baby breastfeeding and do the heel stick. But in terms of the bigger picture, yes, the routine places that pacifiers are used when moms are not there. So NICU, CIRCs, any other thing like a spinal tap or something like that that's painful to a baby, they would expect to be able to use a pacifier for sure. Yes.
Oh, and this is Laura again. Sorry, I'm going to correct myself. It's October 27th. It's a Tuesday that the Baby Friendly USA webinar is. And also, if hospitals are interested in getting some research, on the different 10 steps or support for the 10 steps, they can go to our website, and then under the For Hospitals tab, there's a policy papers section where there's a lot of different policy statements and position papers from a lot of different medical organizations, like nursing organizations and physician organizations in support of the 10 steps.
Any more questions?
Okay, Kakai, ready to go to school?
Okay, we're getting lots of background noise, but it doesn't sound like questions. Okay, guys, well, thank you all for coming onto the webinar. Many of you, most of you, will hopefully be seeing either next week in New Orleans or in November in Mississippi at the Mississippi Conference. So we're looking forward to seeing many of you in person and meeting with you and answering your questions over the next few weeks. And thank you all for joining the webinar, and feel free to email us if you have any extra questions. Okay? Thank you all. Bye-bye.